Fraud swamped Minnesota social services system on Tim Walz watch. Prosecutors say members of the Somali diaspora, a group with growing political power, were largely responsible. President Trump has drawn national attention to the scandal amid his crackdown on immigration. Federal prosecutors charged dozens of people with felonies, accusing them of stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from a government program meant to keep children fed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many in the state saw the case as one off abuse during health emergency, but as new schemes targeting states' generous safety net programs came to light, state and federal officials began to grapple with a jarring reality. Over the last 5 years, law enforcement officials fraud took root in pockets of Minnesota Somali diaspora as scores of individuals made small fortunes by setting up companies that build state agencies for millions of dollars worth of social services that were never provided for. Federal prosecutors say 59 people have been convicted in those schemes so far, and that more than $1 billion in taxpayers' money have been stolen in 3 plots that are investigating. That is more than Minnesota spends annually to run its Department of Corrections. Minnesota fraud scandals stood out even in the context of rampant theft during a pandemic when Americans stole tens of billions through unemployment benefits, business loans, and other forms of aid. So I want to play this clip here.
I can hear you playing it.
Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz deflecting on the fraud schemes that prosecutors say led to the theft of more than $1 billion in taxpayer funds. Many of the defendants are members of the state's Somali community. Let's bring in Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMeth. She is running against Tim Walz for governor. That election is next year. Lisa, for people who are catching up from the holiday weekend, how would you describe the fraud that was happening in Minnesota?
Fraud in Minnesota under the watch of Governor Walz has exploded in his 7 years as governor. There are 28 known scandals of fraud, just over 7 years. And as you heard, Dana, he has said that he takes responsibility for putting people in jail, but he's never apologized to the taxpayers. He's never taken accountability of saying this has happened on his watch, and he's pushed it aside until I, as Speaker of the House, established the Fraud Prevention and Agency Oversight Committee this legislative session, and it has finally drawn national attention. Something that has gone on for years, $1 billion or more of fraud under Governor Walz, finally getting national attention. Thank you.
Speaking of that national attention, it's not just here on Fox News, but the New York Times wrote about it as well, saying that how fraud swamped Minnesota's social services system on Tim Walz's watch. And this is also a lawyer for one of the defendants saying no one was doing anything about the red flags. It was like someone was stealing money from the cookie jar and they kept refilling it. Lisa, there were whistleblowers who were ignored?
That is what we are hearing. And we did put additional whistleblower protection in during this last legislative session. We also tried to put in an office of Inspector General, an independent office of Inspector General, and the Democrats in the House denied us that opportunity. It had been passed in the Senate, bipartisan, and we could not get it through the House as a protection, I believe, for Governor Walz, not wanting that office of Inspector General on an outside view looking in to see what he was really doing. I think he prevented that from going forward.
I'm going to read to you from the White House rapid response reaction saying that Tim Walz on the $1 billion fraud scandal that took place on his watch, I take responsibility for putting people in jail. It's not just Somalis. But they say this. Number one, Walz didn't do jack other than let it happen. These are federal cases. And B, or number two, 71 of the 75 people charged are of East African descent. Now, fraud can happen anywhere, under any circumstances, without proper safeguards. But what about this angle here in terms of the concentration of where the fraud was coming from?
As the governor said in the interview that we are a prosperous state and that would attract criminals, that is not true. We have poor leadership at the top here in Minnesota. What that means is criminals are going to be coming to Minnesota to do their criminal activity. That is a disrespect for taxpayer dollars, and it means at the very top of our state, fraud has been allowed to go forward for years unchecked. It is now, thank you to President Trump and the White House for getting the attention with the U.S. Attorney's Office, making those prosecutions happen. That's what we are grateful for,
Lisa,
because we've been trying to sound the alarm for years.
Let me jump in and ask you one last question. Sorry, I want to just ask you one last question before we run out of time. Do you believe that former Vice President Kamala Harris, who chose Walz to be her running mate in those 107 days of her campaign, do you think that she ever asked about this? I mean, when you're vetted to be the Vice President of the United States, should be a very serious vetting. Doesn't appear that anybody had this on their radar.
I don't know that she asked the question. I wouldn't be able to answer that, but obviously it was not vetted properly to see what was going on here in the state. We knew about fraud before Governor Walz ever became the vice president pick.
All right. Lisa, thank you. We'll follow.
So, yeah. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's just typical of what you get out of the Democratic Party these days. They don't feel that they have any business to take care of. It's merely subjective, emotional, social programs and agendas that they have, but the business of government is beyond them. And it's just absolutely astonishing that he'd say, well, this is an attractive state, so we're going to get lots of criminals coming here. But then it turned out to be Somalis, which show that almost overwhelmingly, which shows that the immigration party is crap. It's fraudulent, and it also is what we are seeing so much of today as to why the blue run cities are hellholes of lawlessness, because it's not been the business of the Democratic Party to enforce the law and maintain public peace, dignity, and order. That's just something that's beyond them, or beyond what they think is their job to address. In other words, oh my God, our people are all victims of crime, but not in terms of being the homeowners and the ordinary citizens that get robbed, beat up, murdered, burglarized, but the criminals are the victims of society. So, oh my God, we can't have law and order because that would mean putting some of these crooks in jail who are not playing Robin Hood and ripping off the adversity that is out there. They are stealing from their own neighbors, killing their own people and whatever. It's just a horrendous mindset. Something's wrong with them. And this thing about not vetting Walz's failure to deliver on his obligation as chief administrative officer for that state of Minnesota, a large one, and failing to maintain some kind of public dignity for the place and allowing this rampant embezzlement, theft, and misconduct to go unaddressed after warnings is just inexcusable. And it shows what kind of garbage we would have had in the White House, either from the neglect of the presidential candidate, Mrs. Imhoff, or her running mate, who was supposed to be backing her up. Neither one of them needed to be sitting in the Oval Office or anywhere close to it, or the observatory, which is the VP's headquarters. Neither one of them needed to be doing a damn thing for the American public, except being someplace other than running the American public.
But can you imagine if she was elected and he was the VP? That the amount of fraud that would have continued.
Oh, yes.
You know,
that's horrible.
Yeah. And not just in Minnesota, but in other states and on a federal level. Because remember when Doge was created, they found all of these fake social securities and money going to NGOs internationally, which was kind of like non-existent. It was a lot of corruption and wasting of money going on. So, I want to go back to highlighting Tim Walz, Tampon Tim. I think I'm about to call him Tampon Tim. So I won't get his name confused. But he's saying that he wasn't aware, and now that he was aware, people are being arrested. But the Minnesota Staff Fraud Reporting account says, for public awareness, we did write to Kamala Harris and the DNC multiple times, warning them about Tim Walz and his incompetence, fraud scandals, and retaliation. We tried our best to keep the public informed as our tweets are public. Maybe Kamala Harris turned a blind eye to fraud like her running mate. Over the years, our messages have not changed. We need fraud to stop in Minnesota and good governance to be restored. Ms. Harris listened to Minnesota state employees who work every day to deliver best services possible to our state and people who expect no less and pay our wages. Tim Walz has caused incredible harm to our state and agencies, retaliated against whistleblowers against fraud. And here's a list of all the scandals from 2019 to 2024. So that and it's Medicaid. I can't hear you. Why are you muted?
Allegations in a Minnesota voter fraud case that first came to light this summer. 2 people pleaded guilty in federal court to being paid to help register voters. In all, 500 to 600 fraudulent voter registration applications were submitted to election officials in offices in 13 Minnesota counties. Esme Murphy has been following this case, and she joins us now. Esme?
Hi there, Frank. It was some sharp election workers in Carver County who realized the names and addresses on the voter registration forms did not match with any county residents. Prosecutors charged 2 people with 1 count each of voter registration fraud. According to the charging documents, the 2 were paid by an unnamed foundation to help register voters. The 2 defendants pled guilty this summer and have since moved out of state. The scope of the 2-year FBI and state investigation was not previously known.
And it's very significant that they said today it was 13 counties, between 500 and 600 fake voter registrations. And that's just from 2 of the independent contractors that worked with this group.
The investigation involves scouring hundreds of records.
On guidance from the FBI, the voter registration applications were mailed directly to the election lead, and instructions were shared to use gloves when handling the forms.
In testimony before the committee, Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon says the system designed to catch voter fraud worked.
This is a case about individuals who conspired to submit false voter registration applications. This is not a case about fraudulent votes. And this is ultimately a case of the system working.
How many were in the system is challenged.
Republican Committee Chair Kristen Robbins, who is running for governor, says she has additional concerns that the unnamed foundation that paid the 2 workers is funded by state taxpayer dollars.
99% of their budget comes from state grants. So this is a group that the state is funding and that then went out and did these voter registrations.
Now, the hearing left a lot of people, including us, with a lot of questions that were not answered. One of the big ones,
if you still had Biden Harris in there, Biden Harris Imhoff in there, or Harris Imhoff Walson boy in there,
Tampon Tim,
they'd be swearing up and down that this was some kind of Donald Trump hallucination and fabrication, claiming that there would be voter fraud. And here it is. So after you get a load of what they've been up to, you have to think, well, maybe, since they've been making such a big fuss about telling a lie long enough and loud enough, they must have really been covering for 2020 as well. So Trump was correct on that, and he's been shown to time after time not to have been lying to the public, though they want to make him some kind of pariah. That's all they have. And it's kind of to the point where it's self-defeating. Like, come on, nobody is that bad. And besides, this stuff does seem to be working. So you get all of these negative reports about Trump's ratings are falling. Well, they just go ask people that they think will be negative to Trump. Like there are places in Memphis I could go to, and I could guarantee that anything that's Republican or conservative or connected with MAGA or Trump is going to get downrated. But I can go 10 blocks in another direction, and I can guarantee you that they will go upscale. So if you wanted to show Memphis was anti-Trump, just go pick that area out where all the rainbow flags are flying, and you'll find all kinds of negativity. It's their right to feel the way they do, but I mean, when the news media is not objective in what they report, then we get a bad idea and we get fed this set of lies over and over again about what's wrong with the system and why the thing is not working.
Well,
and it's not true because it is.
Well, here's the thing. Trump also halted temporary protection status to Somalians as well as Haitians, and he also said he's not going to allow anyone from third world countries to come in here. But at the same time, there are people who are coming in here that are not third world countries. They commit crime and fraud as well.
Sure.
I just think that, how are these people being vetted?
Well, here's one thing, too. You want your immigrants to ramp up the country. In other words, to boost it.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as a athletic team, a professional team, whether it's basketball, baseball, football. Baseball, you have minor leagues and so on and so forth. Football, they come out of college, and basketball the same way. And the idea is to pick those people who can improve the team, first round draft choices. So what happens is, why pick people that aren't very good for the draft into the country? In other words, what is their educational level? What kind of courses did they take when they were in school coming up? Was it something where English was strictly taught, where math was pushed, where STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math were things that were of great importance to the educational system? Now, we have it bad enough with the way our educational system has rotted. We used to have one of the best in the whole world, our public schools, and now no one wants to go to public school because they don't teach anything rigorously, and we have damn fools like Walz and some other Democrats who say the children don't need to learn how to cursively write, and they don't need to memorize their multiplication tables and learn longhand division and multiplication, and they don't need to do homework. And the state of Washington is doing one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, which is they no longer have a bar exam, saying that discriminates against minorities who've always had their hearts set on practicing law. Well, it's a public function, and the lawyer crew in the country is pretty pathetic these days as it is, and to let it slip further, it's like, hey, how would you like going to a doctor's office and the doctor didn't have to go through any medical boards before he could start practicing on you and prescribing medication or performing surgery on you? See,
Yeah,
that's
I have a really
crazy.
good, I have a really good clip that I'm going to play later after our guests come up about, and it's a teacher, it's a former teacher, so she's not teaching anymore. So now she could, spill the tea on how the children are not being educated. But I want to swing back to Tim Walz and this Minnesota Somali scandal, because he was on Meet the Press this Sunday. I think she asked some really good questions lately, this reporter, but he was deflecting. And again, you're talking about, oh, they always want to talk about Trump, and that's all they do is try to defer to Trump.
For him to just randomly decide to do this, it makes no sense. Do your job. Get the criminals out, secure our border, but do it with dignity and respect to the American tradition of respecting immigrants and refugees as a beacon of hope.
Well, speaking of the Somali community, President Trump is targeting them and your state in part. He's citing fraud as the reason for his crackdown. Dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy. And as you heard Senator Kelly say, this president has cut a lot of inspector generals. He's cut programs that could help us tackle this on. So we'll take it on. We'll put folks in jail. I don't care what your nationality is. I don't care what your religion is, your color. If you're committing crimes, these are programs that were meant to serve students with autism, to housing, and to making sure people had enough to eat. There's a reason Minnesota ranks as the top. Lowest childhood poverty, best place for children to live. People are taking advantage of that. They're going to prison. That is totally disconnected with demonizing an entire group of people who came here fleeing civil war and created a vibrant community that makes Minnesota and this country better. But that's Donald Trump. Deflect, demonize, come up with no solutions. He's not going to help fix anything on fraud. My God, there's a big difference between fraud and corruption is something he knows about.
What are your thoughts on that? Like, again, they always got to spin it back to Trump. Like, Trump is the problem. Trump is the boogeyman.
They had the Obama administration, and since they're cousins, I'd put Bush in there too. He wasn't typically Republican. He's just one of those accidents that slipped through the system, and being from the background he was from, he made it in spite of himself. Bush, Obama, and Biden have let this American public down badly, and there have been 25 years less 20 years that we have not had just general incompetence in taking care of the fine details of governance. They just don't have it. It's not their backgrounds to take care of that kind of business. They are just ideologues who mouth away, telling the big tale that is told loudly and long by the communications industry, entertainment industry, and news industry until a large portion of the American public was beginning to believe it, was beginning to hate the fact that they accepted it as a reality, or that they perceived so many people did. It was causing a lot of loss of internal respect for the country. And it's just time that we turn this around, because the average American is a decent person. He's a man or he's a woman, and he stands for masculinity and femininity, a right way, a set of principles, dignity, honor, accountability, rationality, logic, reasoning, and dispassionate analysis of events. And we have been given a bill of goods for quite some time, trying to get us to switch over to something else, and that's not a good thing.
Right. It's not. And listen, the better choice was Trump Vance over Harris and Walz.
Oh,
Because
indubitably.
And I don't want to sit here and say, what if they were, because they're not, but if they were, we would still have open borders. It would
And
that
don't forget Al Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas,
yeah, all of that.
Iran, North Korea, the People's Republic of China, and some other folk that hate our guts that don't have B-52s, B-1s, B-2 bombers, and those long-range delivery systems that have just been allowed to walk across the border with the high explosives. But seriously, this needed to stop. And what Donald Trump and MAGA represent are respectively a laxative and an enema to clean out the constipation in this country. And when those things get administered, stuff starts gushing out. It doesn't smell too good.
Right.
So is it Donald Trump and MAGA administering the enema after the laxative that's the bad thing, or what they're getting out by administering those two things that stinks to the high heavens?